Hamas. It was, they said, a heroic and daring operation. I tell the House what would truly be heroic. It would be for the Palestinian leadership to abandon gesture politics in the United Nations and to take the hard and painful decisions which are necessary to secure peace in the only place it can be achieved, at the negotiating table.
My Lords, I start with the premise that in an ideal world, a negotiated settlement between two parties, any two parties in a dispute, is preferred. But, my Lords, let's try today to understand why the Palestinians have adopted the UN route and why Israel opposes that route. I visited Israel and Palestine in December with Medical Aid for Palestinians and the Council for British-Arab Understanding, along with my noble friend Baroness Warsi. It is declared on my register of interests. I met with international agencies, human rights campaigners, lawyers, politicians, but for me the most moving meeting was with a group called Breaking the Silence. These are ex-Israeli Defense Force soldiers, now speaking out against Israeli government policy in the occupied territories. They wanted neither praise for their bravery nor sympathy for the abuse that they receive in Israel for speaking out. They simply wanted us to be informed about the reality of the occupation. An occupation which has so changed the landscape of the occupied territories, of the territorial area which, according to the 1993 Oslo Accords, would be the future state of Palestine. My Lords, in 1993 there were 110,000 settlers in the occupied territories. There are now 400,000 settlers, and over 500,000 if we are to include Jerusalem. Desperate times make people take desperate actions. In the past, these desperate actions were violent, and we were quite right to urge the Palestinians to forego violence for diplomatic means. And yet when they did, we continuously rebuffed them for it. And when Palestinians, my Lords, all around them see the reality of a two-state solution diminishing, if not already over, then they start to fight for the Palestine that they want to exist, even if it simply exists on paper, out there in the abstract. That is the desperation that we see from the Palestinians. And it's not hard to understand, my Lords, when you visit the occupied territories, communities that are being choked, livelihoods that are being lost, basic needs not being met. It's not hard to understand the feeling of hopelessness. Now, I know, my Lords, many noble lords will stand up today, noble lords whom I consider to be friends, and I am sure they will today argue that no Palestinian state must ever come about without Israel's agreement. I accept that as their sincerely held view. So the question I ask my colleagues who will make that argument today is, what are you doing? As the two sides continue to flog the dead horse of negotiations, what are you doing to preserve the physical integrity of a future negotiated state of Palestine? Do you campaign against these illegal settlements? Do you condemn those, even in our own parties, extremists, as my right honourable friend Alan Duncan so ably argued, who do not condemn illegal settlements? And how do those of you who have the privilege of close relationships in the Israeli government use that to encourage the Israeli government to respect international law? My Lords, our abstentions display a terrible lack of moral character. Our continued lack of support at the UN puts us at odds with our own oft-quoted these days British values of the rule of law, justice and fairness. And our government's decision to ignore parliamentary and public opinion makes our government complicit and responsible for the ever-closing window of a two-state solution becoming a physical reality. My Lords, the desperate attempt by the Palestinians to get a state on paper, even if not in reality, is something that we have at least an obligation to recognise.
My Lords, I hope I'm not making too much of an assumption, but most of the speakers in the debate